Hello everybody and welcome back to another not applicable Formula 1 video. I hope that you're well. I hope you're enjoying 2022 and I hope that as of 2022 you haven't yet broken your New Year's resolution, because today we're going to go through the 10 Formula 1 teams and go through each one, giving them a New Year's resolution for 2022. So one thing that they can change over the course of this season to make 2022 the best year possible for the team, but also moving forward, sort of 2023 and beyond, to continue working towards possibly winning drivers and constructors championships for each one of these teams. So let's start at the bottom with Haas Formula 1. Now, obviously, 2021 was a pretty big year for Haas Formula 1. Changed their driver lineup completely. Still have Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin for next year. I think the problem with Haas Formula 1, though, for me, is upstairs. And as much as it pains me to say, I think Haas in 2022 needs to have a little think about Gene, about Gunther, and whether or not they maybe need a reboot in those departments. Because I just don't trust them. I really don't trust Haas Formula 1 team to put together a performance, a car, and a season that will actually put them back to where they want to be. I know that they've never, challenged for titles, but they used to be a really decent midfield team. And then they had all the rich energy debacle. They've sort of fallen off in the last few years. And then last year was just a complete non-year for Haas Formula 1, wasn't it? Bringing in Nikita Mazepin, I understand you need the money, but he was incredibly slow, and it wouldn't surprise me if he is still in 20th place every single race of next year, barring people who obviously crash out of the race. And then Mick just can't carry this team on his own, especially if he's not given a car that can actually fight anybody else on the grid. Like Haas Formula 1 were the only team not to pick up points in 2021. And do I trust the team to put together a car in 2022? No. I think they need to start looking upstairs rather than at the grid for the changes that need to be made. Next up is Alfa Romeo. Got 13 points at the end of last season, but big changes at Alfa Romeo. Both drivers are changing for next season. And I think the big change that they need to have moving into 2022 has kind of already changed, but I'm more thinking about Valtteri Bottas in that Kimi Räikkönen seat. Now, it might just be because it was Kimi Räikkönen that he always seemed fairly unhappy with the Alfa Romeo team. Now, of course, he knew that he was leaving at the end of the season, but there was always tiny little niggles that Kimi Räikkönen seemed to have with the team that never really helped when it came to a race weekend, when it came to a qualifying. It always seemed like Kimi Räikkönen had issues with Alfa Romeo. And I think Bottas needs to feel comfortable in that team as quickly as possible. We're looking at a driver who came third in the Drivers' Championship last year and helped Mercedes win the Constructors' Championship last year. Moving to Alfa Romeo, he needs to feel comfortable in that car. So I think Alfa Romeo's New Year's resolution needs to be the fact that they need to get a comfortable fin in their car. They need to do everything they possibly can, everything in their volition, to get the best out of Valtteri Bottas. Like, they need to get Valtteri Bottas at his absolute peak every single weekend if they're going to be fighting those cars in front of them this season. I think Valtteri Bottas has got the minerals. I think Valtteri Bottas is good enough, clearly, to be battling with those cars at the front. He was never really given the opportunity at Mercedes to be the big man in the team. Now is his opportunity. Alfa Romeo need to snatch that up as quickly as they possibly can. Next up is Williams. And again, Williams have made a few changes moving into this season. Obviously, George Russell's moved on. Albon comes in. So the big change I think Williams need to make is they need to stop seeing themselves as a training team. And now this might come from the fact that they've had George Russell in the team for a little while, but I think when a lot of people think of Williams, especially over this last era, sort of 2019 to now, and that 2019 Williams car was absolutely atrocious. But I think if you think of Williams in that period, they've always felt a little bit like a Mercedes sister team in a way. It's always been talking about, when is George Russell going to be moving on? When is George Russell going to make that step up to Mercedes? Is George Russell going to be able to move into Mercedes then? Is he going to replace Bottas here or there? Is he going to be able to get a drive here or there? When Lewis Hamilton was obviously away because of COVID, he managed to get into that seat. And I think Williams need to step away from that a little bit. They need to consolidate themselves as, you know what, we're Williams Racing. We deserve to have the drivers that we've got. We deserve to be the team that we are. We're not a jumping point for these drivers anymore. We're not going to be, you know, a babysitter for Mercedes until Valtteri Bottas can be shoveled onto the next team and George Russell can be stepped up. Like, they need to be put into that position where they are a solid midfield outfit that has drivers under their own volition that are going to want to stay with the team for the long term. And you know, that's kind of a problem in that they've brought in Alex Albon. Alex Albon has massive links to the Red Bull teams, and I'm sure Albon, if given the opportunity, would jump into a Red Bull tomorrow. But they need to try and get themselves into a position where if Albon was given the opportunity to move to Red Bull, it wouldn't be just a guaranteed yes, which is tricky. But it might be, you know, something that he thinks about. The fact that Williams have given him this opportunity and Red Bull didn't. The fact that, you know, Williams have offered him this place on the grid and they've given him a car which has been reasonably good and looks like it might step forward. Then they finally look like a proper team rather than, you know, this junior team or a team that you can send your junior driver to get a better drive for them in Formula One. I think they need to move away from that. So that's the change I want to see at Williams over 2022. Moving up a step to Aston Martin, and this is a tricky one. There was a couple of things I thought about when thinking about Aston Martin. First of all, obviously they've got to replace Otmar. But secondarily to that, and I think probably slightly more importantly for the long term, they've got to get this relationship on track in particular between Seb and Lance right. Like Vettel and Stroll just seem to collide on track all of the time, and whenever the two are ever near each other when it comes to the grid, they always just seem to get in each other's way. I don't know whether it's just, you know, the highlights that I've seen or the things I can remember from this season, but it really sticks out to me, especially, you know, even in 2017, these two collided after the checkered flag dropped in Malaysia. And then maybe that from there, I've remembered that and it's sort of stuck in my memory. But I think of Monza, I think of Russia, and the fact that they were tripping over each other, pushing each other into the wall. And it just doesn't seem like a very cohesive team and a very good team ethic that they've got there. I like the team. I like Lance Stroll. I think he's a very proficient midfield driver. I think, you know, if Aston Martin got rid of Stroll, it'd be very tricky to find an adequate replacement quickly on the Formula One grid. And Sebastian Vettel, I obviously rate very highly. He did incredibly well in the Aston Martin, picked up a podium, obviously had a second podium which was taken away from him, 43 points, sort of best of that bunch outside of the Alpines that they were never going to catch towards the end of the season. You know, Vettel has still got it and has shown that he can still drive at the top. But with this team, as it is at the moment, with Vettel and Stroll, I just can't see them taking massive steps forward without those two being able to drive on the same piece of road without bumping into each other every 5 seconds. Similarly, at AlphaTauri, they've got an issue with the team. I think it's a slightly different issue with the team in that the thing I want to see at AlphaTauri is them maybe try and take a step away from Pierre Gasly this year. They were so heavily reliant on Pierre Gasly last year to get them points. If you look at where they finished in the Constructors' Championship, 142 points. If I then break that up into Gasly and Tsunoda for you, 110 for Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda with 32. But remember, Yuki Tsunoda got a 4th place finish in the last race of the season. It's going to be tough for AlphaTauri, but they need to start moving away from Pierre Gasly. Mainly because I think personally, 2023 is going to be the time where we see Pierre Gasly move away from AlphaTauri. Now, whether that is Sergio Perez moving from the Red Bull team and Pierre Gasly gets that step up, or Pierre Gasly looks elsewhere, I think he will move in 2023. I think this is the end of Pierre Gasly at AlphaTauri. Whether he stays with Red Bull depends on the team and obviously his thought process. Does he want to go in there and play second fiddle to Max Verstappen? Maybe not at this point in his career. But I think AlphaTauri as a team need to change the way that they look at Pierre Gasly, change their perspective on the team that they've got, and almost prepare for the fact that Pierre Gasly is not going to be there in 2023. I think there's also going to be a driver change in the next team up, Alpine. If we look at their team at the moment, Alonso and Ocon. a very, very solid team, a really good team, and one that surprised me throughout 2021. And actually, I'm really looking forward to how these two sort of bounce off each other during the 2022 season. I've shown this before, but an incredible finish from them. Alonso, 81 points. Ocon with 74. You could argue Ocon could have even beaten Alonso if he didn't obviously get those issues towards the beginning of the season. What was it? Monza through Silverstone, where he had a real chassis issue. They changed the chassis at Silverstone, and then suddenly the season came back to him a little bit. But Alonso was just dominant throughout the entire year as well. And I think that's where they maybe have a little bit of a problem on their hands, because I think they need to find a slot for Piastri. And the change I want to see at Alpine is a change in one of those two drivers. Who do you pick, though? Is it Alonso? Does Alonso only have one more year in the tank? Does Alonso decide to move away from Formula One for good after next season? I don't really know, because I honestly thought he wouldn't be anywhere as near as good as he was in 2021. He came out of absolutely nowhere, in my opinion, and was incredible. And then Ocon, I don't think was bad either. Obviously, Ocon winning a race, getting incredibly close to a second podium finish, just pit to the post by Valtteri Bottas. And Alpine have got a really tricky situation on their hands. They've got 3 drivers that look to be absolutely phenomenal and ready for Formula One in every single way imaginable, and only 2 slots. It's going to be a very tricky space for Alpine, especially throughout 2022, if Alonso or Ocon doesn't perform in the same way they have in 2021. Alonso, obviously, getting older. Will he be as good? He doesn't have, obviously, the fact that he has been in that Formula One turbo hybrid era for a long time. He's, now with this new regulations, lost out on that information that he had about how those cars work. But at the same time, he's one of the best wheel-to-wheel racers I think we'll ever see in Formula One. Fernando Alonso is a world champion for very good reason. So it is so tricky for Alpine to choose between the two. If Alonso says he wants one more year, you kind of have to give it to him, don't you? But at the same time, you need to find a slot for Piastri as soon as possible. So Alpine are a bit of a tricky situation. Another tricky situation, and especially as a McLaren fan, a tricky situation for me is if McLaren don't get the drive out of Ricciardo, they need to replace Ricciardo if needed. I think the change that we need to see at McLaren is, if Ricciardo isn't good enough, they need to change the way they deal with drivers and be a little bit more cutthroat, in my opinion. I think, if we look at the drivers who changed teams over the course of 2021, we had Vettel, Perez, Sainz, and Alonso, and Ricciardo, 5 drivers coming into new teams in 2021. Out of those 5, I would argue that Daniel Ricciardo was the worst by quite a considerable margin. Like, Carlos Sainz was absolutely phenomenal throughout the entire season. Alonso, I've just talked about, was really, really good. Vettel, really, really good. Perez came into the fore, especially in that second half of the season. Obviously won the race in the first half of the season, but towards the second half of the season, Perez really came into his own. Daniel Ricciardo was so 50-50. It was so up and down. Yes, he got a win behind his belt, but if you take away that 25 points, 90 points in that McLaren over the course of the season, no, just not good enough. Not good enough at all from me. Not good enough at all for McLaren moving forward. And, the reason in the end that they dropped down to 4th place in the Constructors' Championship, if Ricciardo is up there with Norris and battling in and amongst those 160 points, maybe taking a few points off the Ferraris over the course of the season, it's a very different story for McLaren. I think they have to be a bit cutthroat. I think if Daniel Ricciardo doesn't perform to the level that we expect from Daniel Ricciardo, a very experienced driver, he's been at many teams now, he's been there, done it, won races consistently, but hasn't shown it in a McLaren, and I think needs to go if he can't perform next year. That's very contentious, though. How many points do you reckon Daniel Ricciardo needs to have, / where do you think Daniel Ricciardo needs to be in the championship at the end of the year for where McLaren are like, we just need to cut our losses with this and get in somebody different? The absolute opposite is the case for Ferrari. I think their New Year's resolution at Ferrari needs to be changing Carlos Sainz's contract. Currently, Carlos Sainz is out of contract at the end of the 2022 season. They need to sign him up for 2023 and beyond. Like, I know that they did the 5-year contract with Leclerc, and that was absolutely unheard of. Carlos Sainz needs to get signed up as quickly as you possibly can, Ferrari, because he's shown he can do it in lots of different teams. Toro Rosso, he's been at Renault, he's been at McLaren, he's been at Ferrari, and throughout that entire time, he's progressed, improved, and just shown he can do it at every single level on the grid. And I think if Ferrari give him a car, why couldn't he battle for a driver's championship? He was incredibly good in his first season at Ferrari, outdid Leclerc, managed to finish in front of his ex-teammate Norris as well, and just was the best of the rest. Found that 5th place slot for himself and, defined himself as the best of those drivers battling in the 3rd, 4th places. Got podiums fairly consistently throughout the season too. He was wonderful to watch, and Carlos Sainz, I think, deserves a contract with Ferrari. If Ferrari don't get him signed up, he could go anywhere. He could literally slot into any single team on the grid, and that would be an exceptional signing for anybody on the grid for next season. Like, literally, pick a driver out of any team. Maybe Hamilton, Verstappen, and Norris-ish, but I think he replaces pretty much anybody else on the grid. Anybody else on the grid, I would rather take Carlos Sainz than them in that team on a one race or on a season. I think he's phenomenal. I think you need to get Carlos Sainz signed up as quickly as possible if you're Ferrari. Moving into the top 2 then, Verstappen, Perez, Hamilton, Russell, moving forward to Red Bull. And Red Bull's change that I'd like to see is a little bit of a strange one. I think they did incredibly well. They obviously won the title with Max Verstappen last year. So I'm talking more of them as a team, Red Bull. I'm thinking that they need to change the mentality that they have for single seasons and single races. So obviously last season was a little bit strange in the fact that Max Verstappen found himself in a situation where halfway through the season, it looked like he could win the Drivers' Championship fairly comfortably, or sort of just over halfway through the season, especially as we got towards Mexico. It was pretty much over and done with in a lot of people's opinions. A lot of people were like, Max Verstappen has got this on lock. And the fact that Red Bull obviously put so much time and effort into the 2021 season kind of made sense from there. But I think we've seen this from Red Bull quite a lot, where they start a season quite slowly and then they realise, oh, actually, we can catch up a little bit. And they just dedicate everything they possibly can. They throw everything that they can into that season and don't really think about maybe planning in the future. I think that might have been the case in 2021. I think they threw absolutely everything they could at it. They obviously managed to get Max Verstappen that Drivers' Championship. But at the same time, they were trying to set up a new power unit facility and obviously move away from Honda. They were also trying to set up for all of these new regulations in 2022. And I think, there's got to be a point where one of those things falls by the wayside a little bit as you're dedicating so much time to 2021. And I'm really worried that Red Bull next season are going to come out of the blocks a little bit slow. I think they're going to struggle for the first few races of the season and then maybe start to catch up towards the end. And I don't want them to dedicate too much time to 2022 if it's already a lost cause. I want them to, think about the future a little bit more. Think about that power unit in particular. I think that's a really good idea. The fact that they are going to become their own power unit team. They're going to become their own manufacturer in that sense and really have that cohesion throughout the Red Bull system. But they need to focus on that more than individual awards, individual wins over the course of a season, and more build that dynasty again that they had. They're not going to win 4 championships in a row like Vettel did by, throwing things at flash in the pan, Max Verstappen winning 1 championship here, then being rubbish for 3 seasons, having an amazing season, then being rubbish for 3 seasons. They need to try and build towards that real domination layer that they could have in Formula One. Final team then is Mercedes-Benz. And the real thing that I think Mercedes-Benz needs to change in 2022 is the way that they see their second driver. Now, They need to change the way that they respect the second driver in the team. Because Bottas, let's be honest with you, Bottas, over the course of the last 3 to even 4 seasons, and he's only been there for 5, has been the bridesmaid and never the bride. He's always had to play second fiddle to Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton has always been the shining light of Formula One and of Mercedes-Benz. He's always been right at the top of the tree, obviously apart from this year. But Mercedes have always given absolutely everything they possibly can to Lewis Hamilton at the detriment of Valtteri Bottas, in my opinion. They cannot do that with George Russell. They cannot get away with doing that with George Russell in the same way they did with Valtteri Bottas, because George Russell is the future. He is the heir to Lewis Hamilton. I think they kind of knew that they could get away with it with Valtteri Bottas. They kind of knew that Valtteri Bottas wasn't going to be there forever. Valtteri Bottas was not going to be the future of Mercedes, and therefore they could kind of mess him around a little bit over the course of his tenure with Mercedes, and eventually he'd get replaced, but Lewis Hamilton would still be there. I think, if George Russell has 5 years, in the same way that Valtteri Bottas had 5 years, Lewis Hamilton is not going to be in Formula One in 5 years' time, in my opinion. I think George Russell is going to outlive Lewis Hamilton. And therefore, he is going to be the most experienced Mercedes driver. He is going to then step up to that first place in the team. And if they've treated him poorly, if they've, not given him the car or made him feel like he isn't respected in the Mercedes team, he's just going to find another drive. He is good enough to find another drive in another team. I know that he's waited for this opportunity in Mercedes for a very long time, and obviously wants to win races, win championships, get podiums, get fastest laps, all of that stuff that comes along with being in a big team. But if they don't treat him with the respect that he deserves, and they treat him like they've treated Valtteri Bottas, I think that George Russell might try and find a seat elsewhere, and then Mercedes are in real trouble. Because they won't have a Lewis Hamilton to fall back on in the same way that they do the way that they've treated Valtteri Bottas. So they're my 10 changes for the 10 Formula One teams. I'm really excited for 2022. I cannot wait for the season to start in March, but there are a few things that I think the teams could do to make sure that they have an even better season. What do you think of my opinion down in the comments below? Thank you so much for watching recently. It's been incredible growth on the channel. If you didn't check out the video with Tomo, where have you been? I can't believe we managed to get him on the channel. I'll link it down in the description down below. Thank you again so much for watching. Leave a like, subscribe whilst you're down there, and I'll see you next time.